The Caribbean sky had turned the color of old bruises, purple and black, swirling together as the storm approached Port Serena. Ilara stood on the weathered planks of her father's old dock, watching the waves grow hungry and violent. The wind whipped her dark curls across her face, carrying the taste of salt and electricity. "Girl, get inside!" Old Manuel shouted from his boat, already securing the last of his nets. "This one's got teeth!" But Ilara couldn't move. Something held her there, a feeling she couldn't name. The fishing village behind her was already battening down, shutters slamming shut like closing eyes. Her small cottage sat perched above the rocky beach, weathered blue paint peeling like old skin. She should be inside, securing her herbs and candles, not standing here like a fool, waiting for the sea to swallow her whole. The first fat drops of rain hit her skin, warm as blood. Thunder cracked across the sky, and the ocean responded with a roar that made her bones vibrate. This wasn't just any storm. The old women in the village would call it a cleansing, the kind that changed things, that washed away the old world and left something different in its wake. Lightning illuminated the churning water, and that's when she saw it. A dark shape tumbling in the waves, rising and falling like driftwood. But it wasn't driftwood. It was a man. Ilara's heart seized. Her father had drowned in these waters 5 years ago, pulled under by a riptide, while she watched helplessly from this very spot. She'd been 17 then, frozen by fear. She was 22 now, and she would not freeze again. She kicked off her sandals and ran. The wooden dock groaned under her feet as rain began to fall in sheets, blinding and fierce. The man disappeared under a wave, then surfaced again, arms flailing weakly. He was maybe 30 feet from shore, caught in the brutal current that ran parallel to the beach. "Hold on!" she screamed. Though he couldn't possibly hear her over the storm's fury, Ilara hit the water, and the cold shocked her system despite the tropical climate. The storm had churned up the deep water, bringing the chill from below. She was a strong swimmer, had grown up in these waters, but the sea was alive tonight, angry and unpredictable. A wave crashed over her head, salt burning her throat. She surfaced gasping and spotted him again. "Closer now!" His face was pale, lips tinged blue, a gash across his temple bleeding into the water. Their eyes met for a brief second. His were the strangest color, like aged rum in sunlight, and even half-drowned they held an intensity that made her falter. Another wave hit. This time she was ready, diving under it and kicking hard. Her fingers brushed fabric, then skin. She grabbed his shirt and pulled, angling toward shore. He was heavy, dead weight, barely conscious. His head lolled against her shoulder. "Stay with me," she gasped, more to herself than to him. "Just stay with me." The undertow tried to drag them parallel to the beach, but Ilara knew these waters. She let it carry them 20 feet south to where the old reef broke the current, then kicked with everything she had toward shore. Her lungs burned. Her muscles screamed. The man's weight threatened to pull them both under. Her feet finally touched sand. She dragged him into the shallows, his body scraping across broken shells and sea grass. Rain pounded them both, the storm reaching its peak, wind howling like tortured spirits. Lightning split the sky so close she could smell the ozone. On the beach, she collapsed beside him, chest heaving. He wasn't breathing. No. Ilara rolled him onto his side, pushing hard on his back. Water gushed from his mouth. She rolled him flat again, tilted his head back and pressed her mouth to his, breathing life back into his lungs. Once, twice, 3 times. He convulsed, coughing up seawater and gasping. His eyes flew open, wild and disoriented, and his hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. For a moment they stared at each other, rain streaming down their faces, thunder shaking the earth. "You're safe," she said, though she wasn't sure if that was true. "You're alive." His grip loosened. His eyes rolled back, and he went limp. Ilara looked up at her cottage. It was 50 yards away, up a rocky path, through wind that could knock her flat. But she couldn't leave him here. The tide would take him back. "Damn it," she muttered, hooking her arms under his shoulders. "You'd better be worth saving." She dragged him inch by inch up the beach, her back screaming, her hands raw. The wind fought her for every foot. By the time she reached her porch, her vision was tunneling, black spots dancing at the edges. She hauled him through the door and collapsed on the worn wooden floor beside him. The storm raging outside like the end of the world. For a long moment she just lay there, chest heaving, listening to his ragged breathing. Alive. They were both alive. Then she forced herself up. He was bleeding, soaked and shivering despite the warm air. She needed to work fast. Her father had taught her basic medicine, the knowledge passed down from her grandmother who'd been the village healer. She'd extended that knowledge with everything she could read, trading fish for books from the merchants who passed through Port Serena. Ilara lit the oil lamps with shaking hands, bathing the small cottage in golden light. The storm made the windows rattle in their frames, but the old house had weathered worse. She kept her supplies in the cupboard above the clay sink, clean cloths, her grandmother's salves, bottles of herbs and tinctures. She cut away his shirt, and her breath caught. His torso was a map of violence. Old scars crisscrossed his chest and abdomen, pale lines against sun-darkened skin. A fresher wound, days old maybe, ran along his ribs, partially healed but angry red. And that gash on his temple was deep, still bleeding steadily. "What kind of life have you lived?" she whispered, pressing a cloth to the head wound. He stirred, mumbling something incoherent. In the lamplight she could see him more clearly. Strong features, a jaw shadowed with dark stubble, black hair plastered to his skull. Mid-30s, she'd guess. There was something commanding about him, even unconscious, something that made her instinctively wary. She cleaned the wounds with rum, the good stuff she kept for medicinal purposes, and he groaned but didn't wake. The head wound worried her most. She applied a poultice of aloe and wild tobacco leaf, binding it with clean linen. Then she covered him with her father's old wool blanket and sat back on her heels, exhausted. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but inside the cottage felt almost peaceful. The stranger's breathing had evened out deeper now, more natural. Color was returning to his lips. Ilara made herself tea from dried ginger and hibiscus, her hands still trembling slightly. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a bone-deep weariness and the first whispers of doubt. Who was this man? What had he been doing in the water during a storm? And what would happen when he woke? She dozed in her chair as the night wore on, jerking awake at every loud crack of thunder. Around midnight, the storm finally began to exhaust itself, the wind dropping to a constant howl rather than shrieking gusts. The stranger slept on, his chest rising and falling steadily. Just before dawn, Ilara finally surrendered to real sleep, her head pillowed on her arms at the small wooden table. She dreamed of dark water and golden eyes, of ships with black sails, and her father's voice calling her name from somewhere far away. She woke to silence. The storm had passed, leaving behind that peculiar stillness that always followed violence. Grey morning light filtered through her windows, and the stranger was awake, sitting up against the wall, watching her with those unsettling amber eyes. "You saved my life," he said. His voice was rough, accented with something she couldn't quite place. British colonial mixed with something else, something older. "Why?" Ilara sat up slowly, suddenly aware of how small her cottage was, how alone they were. "You were drowning." "What was I supposed to do, watch?" A smile flickered across his face, there and gone like a knife flash. "Most would have, then most are cowards." She stood, putting the table between them, trying to ignore how her heart was racing. "How do you feel?" "Like I went 10 rounds with a hurricane." He touched the bandage on his head carefully, then looked at his bare chest, at her careful stitching and the herb poultices. "You know medicine. Enough to keep you alive." She moved to the cupboard, needing to do something with her hands. "There's bread and guava paste. You should eat. What's your name?" She hesitated. Names had power here in the old beliefs. But he'd see her around the village anyway. Ilara Sanchez, Ilara." He said it slowly, like he was tasting it. I don't need to know." She surprised herself with the words, but they felt right. "The less I know, the better. You'll rest today, heal. Tomorrow you leave." He studied her for a long moment, and she had the unnerving feeling he could see straight through her, past her brave words to the fear underneath. Fair enough. But as she handed him the bread, their fingers brushed, and she felt it again. That sense that saving him had changed something fundamental, had set events in motion that couldn't be stopped. Like the storm had been a warning, and she'd ignored it. Outside, the village was beginning to stir. Soon someone would come to check on her, and when they did, they'd see the stranger. Word would spread. Questions would be asked. Ilara looked at the man sitting in her cottage, scarred and dangerous and alive because of her, and wondered what exactly she'd pulled from the sea. The morning sun painted Port Serena in shades of gold and damage. Ilara stood on her porch surveying the aftermath. Shingles stripped from roofs, fishing nets tangled in palm trees, debris scattered across the beach like the sea had emptied its pockets. The village would spend weeks rebuilding, but everyone was alive. That's what mattered. Behind her, through the open window, she could hear the stranger moving carefully around her cottage. She'd given him one of her father's old shirts, faded blue cotton, that hung loose on him despite his broad shoulders. He was thinner than he should be, she'd noticed while treating him. Like he hadn't eaten properly in weeks. Ilara! Maria's voice carried up the path. Her closest friend was climbing toward the cottage, her face flushed with worry and relief. Gracias a Dios, you're all right. I tried to come last night, but Papa wouldn't let me out in the storm. Ilara stepped off the porch quickly, meeting Maria halfway to keep her from reaching the cottage. I'm fine. The house held up well. I was so worried. Maria grabbed her hands, squeezing tight. She was shorter than Ilara, rounder, with kind eyes, and a tendency to see the best in everyone. Old Manuel said he saw you on the dock right before it hit. Said you wouldn't come in. Girl, you could have been killed. I know, Ilara started, but Maria was already looking past her, her eyes widening. The stranger had appeared in the doorway. He'd combed his wet hair back with his fingers, and despite the borrowed shirt and bandaged head, there was something commanding about the way he filled the frame. Something that made even friendly Maria take an instinctive step back. Who is that? Maria whispered. He was caught in the storm. I pulled him from the water. Ilara kept her voice calm, matter of fact. He'll be gone tomorrow. But Maria's expression had changed. The warmth had drained from her face, replaced by something Ilara couldn't quite read. Fear? Recognition? Ilara, come with me. Now. What? Why? Please. Maria's fingers dug into her arm. Just come. Ilara glanced back at the stranger. He'd retreated inside, giving them privacy, but she could feel him listening. I can't just leave him. Yes, you can. Maria's voice dropped to an urgent whisper. Ilara, the merchant ship that was supposed to dock yesterday? It came in at dawn, battered to hell. They're saying they were attacked 2 days ago by pirates. That the Royal Navy's been hunting a particular crew through these waters for weeks. And the captain they're looking for. She paused, swallowing hard. They say he's the devil himself. That he shows no mercy, takes no prisoners. That he's killed more men than the plague. Cold dread settled in Ilara's stomach. What's his name? Rourke. Captain Rourke. Maria's eyes were wide, frightened. They say he was last seen heading north before the storm hit. That his ship probably went down. That he might have drowned. She looked past Ilara toward the cottage. Or washed up somewhere. Ilara's mouth went dry. She turned slowly, looking back at her home. Through the window she could see the stranger, could see him watching them. As if he'd heard every word. Go home, Maria, Ilara said quietly. Tell no one you saw him. Are you insane? Ilara, if that's him, if that's Rourke, then he's wounded and unarmed in my cottage and I saved his life. That means something. Even as she said it, Ilara wasn't sure she believed it. Just go, please. I'll be careful. Maria looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Ilara's face must have convinced her. You're too brave for your own good, you know that. Just like your father. She squeezed Ilara's hand one more time. I'll come back tonight to check on you. And if you're not fine, I'm bringing Papa and his musket. Ilara watched her friend hurry back down the path, then turned toward the cottage. Her legs felt heavy as she climbed the steps. Inside, the stranger, Rourke, if that's who he really was, stood by the window, his back to her. So you heard, she said. I heard. He didn't turn around. Are you going to turn me in? There's probably a reward. Enough to keep you comfortable for years. Ilara moved to the table, needing something solid under her hands. Are you? Captain Rourke, I mean. The pirate they're hunting. He was quiet for a long moment. When he finally turned to face her, his expression was unreadable. Would you believe me if I said no? I don't know. Smart answer. He moved closer, but slowly, like approaching a skittish horse. The truth is complicated. My name is Rourke. I'm a captain. And yes, I've done things that would make most people want me hanged. Most people. A ghost of a smile. Most people haven't fished a drowning man from a hurricane. Ilara felt anger flare, hot and sudden. Don't try to use what I did as leverage. I saved you because that's what decent people do, not because I owe you anything or you owe me anything. I saved a human being, not a monster. And if I am a monster... His voice was soft, dangerous. What then? She met his eyes, refusing to look away. Then I made a mistake. But I won't compound it by betraying my own principles. You can stay until you're well enough to leave. Then you go, and we never speak of this again. He studied her face for a long time. You're either very brave or very foolish. Probably both. She moved to the cupboard, pulling out the dried fish and cassava bread she'd been saving. Are you hungry? Starving. They ate in silence. Ilara watched him carefully, looking for signs of the monster Maria had described. But all she saw was a man, scarred and weary, eating like he couldn't remember his last meal. There was grace in how he moved, efficiency in his gestures. Military training, maybe, or a hard life at sea. The things they say about me, he said finally, breaking the silence. Some are true. Most are exaggerated. A few are complete fiction. Which parts are true? I've killed men, taken ships, made enemies of people who should be enemies. He set down his bread, his appetite seemingly gone. I've done what I had to do to survive and to protect my crew. If that makes me a monster, then so be it. And the part about showing no mercy, taking no prisoners? His jaw tightened. I've given more mercy than I've received, but mercy doesn't make for good stories. Terror does. And when you're trying to survive in waters controlled by empires and slavers and men who'd kill you for sport, sometimes fear is the only weapon that works. Ilara wanted to ask more, to understand, but footsteps on the path outside made them both freeze. Heavy boots, multiple sets, men's voices speaking Spanish. Rourke was on his feet instantly, moving toward the back window with a speed that belied his injuries. Ilara grabbed his arm, stopping him. If you run, they'll chase you. You can't outrun them like this. She shoved him toward the corner where her father's old fishing gear was piled. Hide there. Don't make a sound. Ilara, trust me. She met his eyes, saw the war happening behind them. You trusted me enough to let me save your life. Trust me now. He hesitated, then nodded, moving behind the pile of nets and poles, just as someone knocked on her door. Ilara took a breath, smoothed her hair, and opened it. 4 men stood on her porch. 3 she recognized as local fishermen, who sometimes worked with the Royal Navy as informants. The 4th was a naval officer, young and officious in his blue coat, despite the Caribbean heat. Miss Sanchez? The officer removed his hat, revealing sweat-dampened hair. Lieutenant James Carver, Royal Navy. I apologize for the intrusion, but we're conducting a search of all residences along the coast. A search? For what? Ilara kept her voice curious, concerned, nothing more. A dangerous criminal. A pirate captain named Rourke. His ship was destroyed in the storm, and we have reason to believe he may have made it to shore. Carver's eyes scanned past her into the cottage. May we come in? Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, but that would only make them suspicious. Of course, though I assure you, I've seen no one but my friend Maria this morning. The men filed in, their boots loud on her wooden floor. They spread out, looking behind furniture, checking the bedroom, pulling back her curtains. Ilara's heart hammered so hard, she was sure they could hear it. One man moved toward the corner where Rourke was hidden. You live alone? Carver asked, watching her face. Since my father died 5 years ago. That must be difficult. A young woman by herself. His tone was sympathetic, but his eyes were sharp. You were seen on the dock last night during the storm. Why, Ilara had known this question was coming. She'd prepared for it. I was securing my father's boat. It's all I have left of him. I know it was foolish, but I wasn't thinking clearly. Did you see anyone in the water? Anyone at all? Visibility was almost zero. I could barely see my own hands. Not a lie, not exactly. If someone was out there, I wouldn't have known. The fisherman near the corner was pushing aside nets now, getting closer. Ilara forced herself to stay calm, to keep her breathing steady. If they found him, what would she say? That she didn't know who he was? That she'd found him unconscious and hadn't looked at his face? Sir! One of the other men had found the bloody cloths Ilara had used to clean Rourke's wounds, discarded in her wash basin. He held them up. She's treated someone recently. Carver's expression sharpened. He turned to Ilara, and she saw the trap closing. Who are you treating, Miss Sanchez? Her mind raced. Myself. I cut my hand on broken wood during the storm. She held up her right hand, showing him an old scar on her palm. It bled quite a bit. Looked worse than it was. Show me the wound. It's already healed. I'm skilled with herbs and medicine. She kept her voice steady, matter of fact. My grandmother taught me. The fisherman in the corner had moved the last net aside. Ilara's breath stopped. He was staring directly at the space where Rourke should be. But it was empty. Her confusion must have shown on her face because Carver moved toward her. Miss Sanchez, if you're hiding something, I strongly advise you to tell us now. Aiding a pirate is a hanging offense, even for women. I'm hiding nothing. She met his eyes directly, drawing on every ounce of courage she had. Search all you want. You'll find no pirate here. They searched for another 10 minutes, thorough and frustrated. They checked every corner, looked under her bed, even examined her father's old sea chest. But they found nothing. Finally, Carver replaced his hat, his jaw tight with annoyance. If you see anything suspicious, anything at all, you're to report to the garrison immediately. Is that clear? Perfectly clear. After they left, Ilara closed the door and leaned against it, her legs shaking. She waited until their footsteps faded, until she was sure they were gone, before she spoke. They're gone. You can come out now. Silence. She frowned, moving toward the corner. Rourke? Not there. His voice came from above her. She looked up to see him clinging to the roof beams, his arms shaking with effort, sweat beading on his forehead. The wound on his side had reopened, blood seeping through the borrowed shirt. God's teeth, she breathed. How did you... Lots of practice. He dropped down, landing with a grunt of pain. His hand went to his side, coming away bloody. Though I'm getting too old for this. Ilara moved to support him, guiding him to the chair. You've undone all my work. Idiot. Better than undone work than both of us undone at the end of a rope. But his face was pale, his breathing shallow. Thank you for not giving me up. I told you I won't betray my principles. She pulled up his shirt, examining the wound. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't good either. Though I'm starting to question my sanity. He laughed, then winced. That makes two of us. As she cleaned and redressed the wound, the sun climbed higher in the sky, and Ilara wondered what she'd gotten herself into. She'd saved a man from drowning. That was supposed to be the end of it. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something she couldn't even name yet. Something dangerous and irreversible, and despite everything, despite the fear and the uncertainty and the very real threat of the gallows, a part of her, a part she didn't want to examine too closely, was glad she'd made the choice she did. 3 days passed. 3 days in which Ilara's small cottage became a strange kind of sanctuary, removed from the normal rhythms of village life. The Royal Navy increased their patrols. Their bluecoats a constant presence on the beaches and in the markets. Bounty notices appeared on walls and fence posts. A reward of £500 for Captain Rourke, dead or alive. Ilara saw the notices every time she went to the market. £500, enough to buy a real house, to never worry about money again, to leave Port Serena entirely and start fresh somewhere new. The number haunted her. But every time she returned to the cottage, she'd find Rourke healing, growing stronger, and the idea of turning him in became more impossible. He was a difficult patient. too restless to stay in bed, too proud to admit when he was in pain. By the second day, he was insisting on helping around the cottage, mending her fishing nets with surprising skill, fixing the loose shutter that had been broken for months. His hands were calloused but precise, the hands of someone who'd spent a lifetime working with rope and wood. "You don't have to do this," Ilara said, watching him splice a particularly difficult knot. "You should be resting." "I'm not good at rest." He didn't look up from his work. Never have been. They fell into an uneasy routine. Ilara would leave at dawn to tend her small fishing boat, to sell her catch, to maintain the appearance of normalcy. She'd bring back food, news, whatever she could gather. Rourke would stay hidden, moving to the back room if anyone approached, his presence a secret that grew heavier with each passing day. Maria came by twice, her eyes full of questions Ilara couldn't answer. "You're playing with fire," she'd whispered on her second visit. "The Navy's offering a reward now. People are getting desperate." "I know. Then why? Why are you doing this?" Ilara couldn't explain it, not in a way Maria would understand. How could she explain that looking at Rourke didn't fill her with fear, but with questions? That she'd spent her entire life in Port Serena, following rules, being good, being safe, and it had left her feeling like she was waiting for something, anything to happen. She'd saved his life. That was part of it. But there was more. Something in the way he looked at the sea through her window, like a man looking at home. Something in the careful way he moved, like violence was always a heartbeat away but held in check by iron will. He fascinated her, and fascination was dangerous. On the third evening, as purple twilight settled over the water, Rourke finally told her his story. They were eating dinner. Fresh snapper she'd caught that morning. When he set down his fork and looked at her directly. "You deserve to know who you're harboring. I told you, I was born in Bristol," he continued as if she hadn't spoken. "My father was a merchant, my mother a seamstress. Respectable people. They had plans for me, university and a good marriage and all the rest." His smile was bitter. "Then the press gang came. I was 16 walking home from the docks. They grabbed me, beat me when I fought back, and put me on a naval vessel bound for the Caribbean. Didn't even let me say goodbye." Ilara had heard similar stories. The Royal Navy's need for sailors was insatiable, and they weren't particular about how they got them. "I served for 8 years. Learned to sail, to navigate, to fight. Also learned that the Navy wasn't so different from the pirates they hunted. The captains lived well while the crew starved. They'd flog a man half to death for stealing bread, then turn around and raid Spanish ships for gold." He stared at his hands, scarred and weathered. "I watched good men die for nothing. For the glory of an empire that didn't give a damn about them. So you deserted." "Not exactly. My ship was attacked by a pirate vessel off the coast of Jamaica. Half our crew was killed in the fighting. Those of us who survived were given a choice. Join them or die. Most of the men chose to join. I was one of them." He stood, moving to the window, looking out at the darkening sea. "At first I told myself it was survival, just until I could escape, get back to England, back to my life. But the longer I sailed with them, the more I realized there was no life to go back to. I'd been stolen from it, and it had moved on without me. So you became a pirate. I became free." He turned to face her, and in the lamplight his eyes were molten gold. "Or as free as any man can be in these waters. I worked my way up, learned from the best and worst. Took my own ship when I was 25. Started my own crew. And the raids? The killing? We targeted slavers mostly. Merchant ships carrying human cargo from Africa to the Americas. We'd attack, free the captives, give them the choice to join us, or we'd take them to maroon settlements. Some of my best crew are former slaves." His voice was hard, defiant. "The British Empire calls that piracy. I call it justice." Ilara felt her understanding shift, the simple narrative of pirate and criminal becoming more complex. "But you've attacked other ships too. The merchant vessel that came in the other day was carrying weapons to a plantation owner in Barbados. A man who's killed more people through brutality and neglect than I could in 10 lifetimes. Rourke's jaw tightened. "But yes, we took their cargo. We took their money. We need supplies same as anyone. And if that makes us criminals in their eyes, so be it. You can't just decide which laws to follow. Why not? They do! He moved closer, and she could feel the intensity radiating off him. The same empire that calls me a criminal built its wealth on stolen land and stolen people. The same navy that hunts me protects slave ships. Don't talk to me about laws, Ilara. Laws are just tools, the powerful used to stay powerful. She wanted to argue, but the words stuck in her throat. Because wasn't he right? She'd seen the brutality of the system herself. Watched families torn apart, watched good people broken by poverty, while the colonial administrators grew fat and rich. What happened to your ship? She asked instead. How did you end up in the water during the storm? His expression darkened. We were betrayed. One of my crew, a man I trusted, sold our location to the Navy. They were waiting for us off the coast of Hispaniola. We fought, but they had 3 ships to our 1. He touched the wound on his side unconsciously. We managed to escape, but we were damaged. The storm finished what the Navy started. The ship broke apart. I watched her go down, watched my crew scatter to the winds. Did they survive? Some, maybe. We had a contingency plan, a place to meet if we were ever separated. But I can't know for sure. The pain in his voice was raw, unguarded. Those men were my family, more than the one I was born to, and I led them into a trap. Ilara understood that pain. She'd felt it when her father died, the guilt of the survivor, the what-ifs that plagued sleepless nights. It wasn't your fault. You were betrayed. I should have seen it coming, should have been more careful. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. Silas had been acting strange for weeks, moody, secretive. I should have... He stopped, shook his head. Doesn't matter now. What's done is done. They were quiet for a long moment. The only sound, the distant crash of waves and the chirp of night insects. Finally, Ilara spoke. You should leave, soon. The longer you stay, the more danger we're both in. I know. Where will you go? North, probably. I have contacts in the Bahamas, people who owe me favors. If any of my crew made it out, that's where they'll be waiting. He looked at her, his gaze searching. Come with me. The words hit her like a physical blow. What? Come with me. He moved closer, and she could see the earnestness in his face. You're wasted here, Ilara. I've watched you these past few days, seen how you move, how you think. You're smart, capable, brave enough to fish a wanted pirate from a hurricane. You don't belong in this village, living half a life. This is my home. Is it? Or is it just the place you've been too afraid to leave? The accusation stung, because it was true. How many times had she stood on the dock, watching ships sail away, wondering what lay beyond the horizon? How many times had she felt the walls of Port Serena closing in, suffocating her with their smallness? I don't know you, she said, but her voice wavered. I don't know your world. You know me better than most people who've sailed with me for years. You've seen me at my weakest, most vulnerable, and you didn't turn away. He reached out slowly, giving her time to move back, and touched her hand. I'm not promising you safety, Ilara. I can't. But I can promise you freedom. Real freedom, not the illusion of it. I need to think. I leave tomorrow night. High tide. I'll understand if you're not there, but... He squeezed her hand gently. I hope you will be. That night, Ilara lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind a storm. Everything she'd built, everything she was tied to this place. Her father's memory, her friends, her reputation. To leave would be to abandon all of it. But wasn't she abandoning herself by staying? She thought of the £500, of how easy it would be to end this, to return to normal. But the thought made her sick. Just before dawn, she made her decision. The next day moved with the strange slowness of moments before irreversible change. Ilara went through her routines mechanically, her mind elsewhere. She sold her morning catch at the market, listening to the gossip with half an ear. The Navy was expanding their search. Someone claimed to have seen a suspicious figure near the northern coves. The reward had increased to £700. £700. A fortune. You look distracted, old Manuel said as she counted out her coins. He'd known her father, had taught her to read the weather and the tides. His weathered face was kind, but concerned. Everything all right, girl? Just tired. The storm took a lot out of me. He studied her for a long moment. Your father used to get that look sometimes. Right before he'd make a decision that scared him, he'd say fear was just your instincts telling you something mattered. Manuel squeezed her shoulder. Whatever you're deciding, make sure it's something you can live with. The words followed her home. Could she live with leaving? Could she live with staying? When she returned to the cottage, Rourke was gathering. His few possessions, the knife she'd given him from her father's things, some dried food for the journey, a water skin. He looked up when she entered, his expression carefully neutral. "You're really going," she said. "I told you I would. Tonight, when the tide turns." He paused, his hands stilling. "Have you thought about what I asked?" Before she could answer, footsteps pounded up the path. Multiple sets, running. Ilara's heart seized. Rourke was moving toward the back window when the door burst open. But it wasn't the Navy. It was Maria, her face pale with fear, and behind her, 3 men Ilara didn't recognize. Rough-looking, with the worn clothes and hard eyes of sailors. One of them smiled, and it was like watching a shark surface. "Well, well," the man said, his accent thick with the mixed tongues of the Caribbean. "Captain Rourke. Been looking for you." Rourke went very still. Silas, the betrayer. Ilara felt ice flood her veins. Silas stepped into the cottage, his companions flanking him. He was tall, wiry, with a scar that ran from his ear to his jaw. "Surprised to see me? You shouldn't be. You always were too trusting, Captain. Made you weak. Let the women go. This is between us." "Oh, I don't think so." Silas pulled a pistol from his belt, aiming it casually at Maria. "See, I've got a new employer now. The Royal Navy's paying very well for information. £700 for you, dead or alive. But here's the thing, they're paying even better for everyone who helped you. £300 each." His eyes slid to Ilara. "Your little rescuer here is worth quite a bit," Maria whimpered, tears streaming down her face. "Ilara, I'm sorry. They followed me. They made me tell them you were hiding someone. I didn't know. It was him. I swear I didn't." "It's all right, Maria," Ilara said, keeping her voice calm despite the terror clawing at her throat. "It's not your fault." "Touching," Silas said. "Now, Captain, you're going to come with us nice and quiet. You try anything, I shoot the girl, then the pretty one. Understand?" Rourke's hands were up, his body language submissive, but Ilara could see the calculation in his eyes. He was looking for an opening, a chance, but there were 3 of them armed, and he was still injured. "Why?" Rourke asked, and Ilara heard the genuine pain in his voice. "We were brothers, Silas. I trusted you with my life. And that was your mistake." Silas moved closer, keeping the gun trained on Maria. "You know what your problem is, Rourke. You think you're better than the rest of us, taking the moral high ground, freeing slaves, only attacking bad ships. Like that makes you noble." He spat on the floor. "You're still a pirate, still a killer. The only difference is you've got a conscience, and that makes you predictable, makes you weak. So you sold us out for what? Money? For survival. The Navy's closing in, Rourke. The age of pirates is ending. Smart men are making deals, securing pardons, getting out while they still can. Stupid men die hanging from ropes." Silas gestured to his companions. "Bind him, carefully." One of the men approached Rourke with rope. Ilara's mind raced. If they took him, he'd hang. And so would she for harboring him. Maria too, probably, guilty by association. They were all dead unless she did something. Her eyes fell on the oil lamp on the table. Without thinking, without planning, she grabbed it and threw it at Silas. It happened fast. The lamp shattered against his shoulder, oil splashing across his shirt and face. He screamed, clawing at his eyes. His pistol discharged, the ball burying itself in the wall inches from Maria's head. Rourke moved like lightning. He grabbed the nearest man, using him as a shield as the third drew his own weapon. They crashed into the table, wood splintering. Maria screamed and bolted for the door. "Run!" Ilara shouted, shoving her friend toward safety. Then she grabbed her father's fishing knife from the counter, the blade she'd used 1,000 times to gut fish and cut rope. The third man was aiming at Rourke. Ilara didn't think, just reacted. She lunged, driving the knife into his shoulder. He howled, the gun falling from his fingers. She'd never hurt anyone before. The feeling of steel parting flesh made her stomach heave, but she didn't let go. Rourke had knocked his opponent unconscious. He swept up the fallen pistol, turning it on Silas, who was still rubbing oil from his eyes. "Don't move." Silas froze, his hand halfway to his own weapon. Even blinded and disarmed, he smiled. "You won't shoot me. Not in cold blood. That's not who you are, Captain. You don't know who I am anymore." Rourke's voice was cold, final. "You saw to that when you murdered my crew. They're not dead. Most of them, anyway. The Navy's got them in the garrison, waiting for you to try a rescue." Silas's smile widened. "Oh, they didn't tell you that part, did they? That was my idea. Bait for the trap." Ilara saw Rourke's hand tighten on the pistol, saw the war happening behind his eyes. Kill Silas, and there'd be one less traitor in the world. But there'd be no going back from it. Not that kind of killing. He's lying, she said softly, trying to manipulate you. Don't let him. I'm not lying. They're in the garrison right now, 23 men locked in the hold, set to hang at dawn. Silas was recovering his confidence. "So here's your choice, Captain. You can shoot me, feel real good about your revenge. But then you'll never get your crew back. Or you can let me go and maybe, just maybe, you'll find a way to save them." "What's it going to be?" Footsteps outside, shouts in the distance. Someone had heard the gunshot. They had minutes, maybe seconds, before the Navy descended on them. Rourke looked at Ilara. In that moment, she saw everything he wasn't saying. The apology, the regret, the impossible choice. "Go," she said. "Save them. Ilara, go." She grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the back window. "I'll slow them down. I'll say you took me hostage, that I didn't know who you were. Just go. Come with me. Right now, we'll figure it out together." She wanted to. God, she wanted to. But Maria was out there, frightened and confused. The village would need someone to explain, to manage the aftermath. And if she ran now, everyone she'd ever known would suffer the consequences. "I can't." "But you need to." She pushed him toward the window. "Save your crew, Rourke. That's who you are. That's what makes you different from him." He kissed her then, sudden and fierce and desperate. She tasted salt and smoke and goodbye. Then he was gone, disappearing. Into the jungle behind her cottage as the front door burst open again. This time it was the Navy. Lieutenant Carver, his face flushed with excitement, his pistol drawn. He took in the scene. The unconscious man, Silas rubbing his eyes, the man Ilara had stabbed clutching his shoulder, and Ilara standing in the middle of it all, her father's knife still in her hand. "Where is he?" Carver demanded. Ilara dropped the knife, her hands shaking. This was it, the moment that would define everything that came after. She could tell them the truth, could lead them right to Rourke, could collect the reward and be seen as a hero. Or she could lie. "He went north," she said, "toward the coves. He had a gun. He said if I didn't help him, he'd kill me and everyone I loved." Carver studied her face, searching for deception. She met his eyes, letting him see her fear. It wasn't hard. She was terrified. "Sir?" One of his men called from the window. "Fresh tracks heading into the jungle. He's running inland." Carver swore. "You two, secure these men, the rest of you, with me." He paused at the door, looking back at Ilara. "You did the right thing, Miss Sanchez. You're a brave woman. Then they were gone, crashing through the jungle, following the false trail Rourke had left. Ilara sank into her chair, her legs finally giving out. Silas laughed, a bitter, pained sound. "You bought him maybe an hour, maybe 2. They'll catch him eventually. They always do." "Maybe," Ilara said quietly. "Or maybe he's smarter than you think. The Navy soldiers left to guard the prisoners were young, barely older than boys. They tied up Silas and his men, then stood awkwardly in her cottage, unsure what to do with her. "Ma'am, we'll need you to come to the garrison," one said, "to give a full statement." "Of course." Ilara stood, smoothing her dress. Her hands had stopped shaking. She felt strangely calm, like she'd passed through fear into something else, something clearer. As they led her down the path, the entire village turned out to watch. She saw Maria in the crowd, her face tear-streaked, but safe. Old Manuel, his expression unreadable. The baker's wife, the fisherman, the children she'd taught to swim, all of them staring at her like they'd never seen her before. Maybe they hadn't. Maybe she'd never really let them see her. At the garrison, they put her in a room and made her wait. Through the barred window, she could see the harbor, the masts of naval ships stark against the evening sky. Somewhere out there, Rourke was moving, planning, preparing to do something impossible. Lieutenant Carver came in an hour later, exhausted and frustrated. "We lost him. He disappeared into the mangroves. We'll find him eventually, but—" He sat down across from her, removing his hat. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." So she told him. A carefully edited version where she was a victim, naive and frightened. Where Rourke had threatened her, manipulated her, kept her prisoner in her own home. She hated lying, hated the taste of the words, but she forced them out one after another. "And you never suspected who he was?" Carver asked. "Not until Maria told me. By then I was too frightened to do anything." She looked down at her hands, at the blood still under her nails from stabbing Silas's man. "I just wanted to survive." Carver seemed to believe her, or maybe he just wanted to believe her because the alternative, that a respectable young woman had willingly harbored the most wanted pirate in the Caribbean, was too complicated. They kept her overnight, but by morning they decided she was more useful as a witness than a prisoner. They released her with warnings to stay in the village, to report any suspicious activity immediately. Ilara walked home through the early morning light. Her cottage looked the same, but everything felt different. She'd crossed a line, and there was no going back. That night, she stood on her dock, watching the sunset paint the water gold and crimson. The tide was turning, pulling toward the open sea. She wondered if Rourke had made it to his crew, if he'd found a way to free them, if he was already gone, sailing toward some new horizon. She wondered if she'd ever see him again. A sound behind her made her turn. Her heart leapt, hoping, but it was just Maria, approaching cautiously. "I'm sorry," Maria said, "for leading them to you, for everything. You were afraid. I understand." "Do you?" Maria looked out at the water. "The whole village is talking. Some say you're a hero, others say you're a fool who got lucky. What do you say?" Ilara thought about it, about the moment she'd pulled Rourke from the water, about the choice she'd made to protect him, about the kiss that still burned on her lips. "I say I did what felt right, and I'd do it again." Maria smiled sadly. "You've changed. I can see it in your eyes. You're not the same Ilara who fished me out of the surf when we were 7. "No, I'm not." They stood together in silence, watching the sun sink below the horizon. And when true darkness came, Ilara saw it. A ship on the far edge of the world, sails catching the last light. It was too far to see details, but she knew. She knew. The ship turned north, disappearing into the night, and Ilara stayed on her dock. Long after Maria left, long after the stars came out, long after the tide turned again, she thought about freedom, about choices, about the man she'd saved and the life she'd chosen to keep living. They were both valid, both real. But standing there, with salt air in her lungs and the vast Caribbean spreading before her, she wondered if maybe there was a third option. Something in between staying and leaving, between safety and freedom. Maybe someday she'd find out. Maybe someday that ship would return. But for now, she had her cottage, her village, her life. And she had a secret, carried close to her heart. She'd looked into the eyes of the most feared pirate captain in the Caribbean, and she hadn't seen a monster. She'd seen a man, flawed and dangerous and complicated, but human, and that made all the difference. 3 months later, a package arrived at Port Serena on a merchant ship. No return address, no explanation. Just a wooden box addressed to Elara Sanchez. Inside, wrapped in silk, was a compass, silver and old, its face engraved with intricate designs of waves and ships and stars, and on the back, scratched in rough letters, for when you're ready to navigate your own course. Relara held it in her hands, feeling its weight, its possibility. She looked out at the sea, at the horizon where water met sky. Not today, she thought, but maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, maybe someday soon. The compass pointed north, always north, toward adventure and danger and everything she'd ever wondered about. She closed her fingers around it and smiled. The storm had brought Rourke to her shore, but the real storm, the one that would reshape her entire world, was still building, and when it finally broke, she'd be ready.